What if everything the world teaches about success is completely upside down? What if true happiness comes not from gaining more, but from letting go? What if the key to a fulfilled life lies in being poor in spirit, meek and merciful? These questions shake the very foundation of what we've come to accept as the path to a good life. And yet, over 2,000 years ago, Jesus of Nazareth stood on a hillside and delivered a message that still reverberates today. A message that flipped social and spiritual norms on their head. That message is the Beatitudes. These statements, brief yet profound, begin what is now known as the Sermon on the Mount, and they outline a radical vision for life in the kingdom of heaven. Unlike the teachings of religious leaders or political powers of his time, Jesus didn't call his followers to assert dominance, seek wealth, or chase after recognition. Instead, he blessed the poor in spirit. He elevated those who mourn, called the meek blessed, and held up peacemakers as the true children of God. These declarations weren't just spiritual affirmations. They were revolutionary declarations that invited people into a new way of being, a sacred rebellion against a world of ego, injustice and pride. To understand the gravity of the Beatitudes, we must first recognize the cultural and historical context in which they were delivered. First century Palestine was under Roman occupation. Power was military, authority was hierarchical, wealth was concentrated, and those who suffered were often seen as cursed or abandoned by God. Into this world, Jesus spoke words that would have sounded absurd, even dangerous. Who in their right mind would say that the poor in spirit are blessed? Who would comfort those who mourn with promises of divine favor? And yet, this is exactly what Jesus did. His teachings dismantled the metrics of worth as defined by empire, and instead introduced a divine economy, one where the last would be first and the lowly would be lifted up. The Beatitudes form the DNA of this divine order. They're not moral goals to strive for in hopes of earning favor. They're descriptors of the kind of people God is already blessing. And in that, they offer both comfort and challenge. Comfort because they speak to the marginalized, the broken-hearted, the seekers. Challenge because they demand a radical shift in how we live, perceive others, and understand blessing itself. What makes the Beatitudes especially compelling is how they continue to confront the values of our modern world. We live in an era driven by competition, self-promotion, and endless consumption. Strength is prized, weakness is hidden. Grief is rushed, meekness is mistaken for passivity, and mercy is too often dismissed as naivety. But in the Beatitudes, Jesus reveals that it's exactly in these often overlooked virtues where true power resides. Each statement is a mirror. It invites us to look inward and ask, do I hunger for righteousness or for recognition? Do I extend mercy or demand vengeance? Do I seek peace or perpetuate division? These aren't just rhetorical reflections. They're meant to transform us, to rewire the heart, reorder priorities, and reshape communities. As we begin this journey into the heart of Jesus' teachings, we're not simply analyzing ancient words. We're being invited into a living truth. The Beatitudes are a manifesto, yes, but more than that, they are a map. A sacred guide not only to spiritual maturity, but to becoming people of light in a world that often dwells in shadows. The Beatitudes begin with a striking declaration. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. At first glance, this seems contradictory. In a world that champions self-confidence, assertiveness, and self-reliance, how can being poor in spirit be seen as a blessing? Yet, Jesus invites us to consider an entirely different perspective. One where spiritual poverty is not about despair or inadequacy, but about humility, dependency, and openness to divine grace. To be poor in spirit is to recognize our limitations, to acknowledge our need for God, and to surrender the illusion of control. It is the first step on a journey toward transformation. This teaching is not about glorifying suffering or romanticizing weakness. Instead, it draws attention to the profound strength found in spiritual vulnerability. Those who are poor in spirit are not weak, they are awake. They see the emptiness of material promises and the futility of ego-driven pursuits. They know that true fulfillment comes not from hoarding power or possessions, but from living in right relationship with the divine and with others. In this sense, the poor in spirit are the richest of all, because they are open vessels ready to receive the fullness of the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. This is the next startling statement. Mourning, in this context, extends beyond personal grief. It includes mourning over the brokenness of the world, the injustice that plagues communities, and the separation from what is good, true, and holy. Jesus acknowledges that to mourn is to care deeply. It is to allow the heart to be pierced by the pain of others and to feel the weight of a world not yet healed. In this sorrow, there is hope. The comfort promised is not a mere emotional consolation. It is the assurance of divine presence and the promise of restoration. To mourn in a world that often numbs or denies pain is a courageous act. It means choosing to remain tender in the face of suffering. It means not turning away from the realities that break the heart. And in doing so, we become co-sufferers with Christ, participating in a redemptive process that holds both grief and grace. Comfort, then, is not a quick fix but a deep companionship, a God who walks with us through the valley of tears. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meekness is frequently misunderstood as weakness or passivity, but in the biblical sense, meekness is strength under control. It is the power that chooses gentleness over coercion, humility over pride, and patience over force. The meek do not seek to dominate or manipulate. Instead, they trust in God's justice and timing. This is a radical shift from the world's values, where inheritance is often seized through aggression, competition, and ambition. Jesus redefines greatness through meekness. He points to a power that is not loud but steady, not boastful but enduring. The meek are not doormats, they are grounded. Their strength lies in their refusal to let pride or fear dictate their actions. They inherit the earth not through conquest but through character. In a world anxious for control, the meek offer a presence of peace, a non-anxious resistance rooted in divine trust. These three Beatitudes, poverty of spirit, mourning, and meekness, form the foundation of the spiritual life Jesus envisions. They teach us to release our illusions, to feel deeply, and to respond with grace. They are not a list of moral checkboxes, but a portrait of the kind of heart God blesses. Through them, we see that true transformation begins not with external success, but with inner surrender. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. With this beatitude, Jesus speaks directly to the core of human desire. Hunger and thirst are primal urges, powerful and persistent. To hunger and thirst for righteousness is to crave justice, holiness, and moral integrity with the same intensity we crave food and water. It's not a casual interest or a passing wish. It is a deep, consuming longing for a world set right, for a soul aligned with divine truth. Righteousness in this context goes beyond personal piety. It encompasses a longing for societal justice, for healing of relationships, for systems and structures that reflect God's love and fairness. It means desiring not only to be good, but to see goodness prevail everywhere. This beatitude speaks to the restlessness of those who cannot turn away from injustice, who feel an ache for truth in a world clouded by lies. Jesus promises that such hunger will not go unanswered. The very longing becomes the path to satisfaction, for it leads us into deeper communion with God's purposes. The image of being filled is both spiritual and tangible. It suggests nourishment, wholeness, and a sense of being anchored in what is true. In a society driven by distractions and instant gratification, many hunger for things that never satisfy. But when we direct our hunger toward righteousness, we find ourselves filled with something lasting, something eternal. This is the nourishment that sustains the soul, a fulfillment not found in possessions or accolades, but in living rightly before God and others. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Mercy is a divine trait, a bridge between justice and compassion. To be merciful is to look upon others with the eyes of grace, to choose forgiveness over retaliation and kindness over condemnation. Mercy does not ignore wrongdoing. It acknowledges it and still chooses to act in love. Jesus lifts up mercy as a core value of the kingdom, where grace triumphs over judgment. In showing mercy, we reflect the heart of God. The merciful do not hold grudges, do not delight in punishment, and do not shut the door on those who fail. Instead, they offer second chances, they empathize with weakness, and they seek reconciliation. The promise given is profound. Those who extend mercy will receive mercy. This is not transactional, it is transformational. Mercy begets mercy, both in our relationships with others and in our relationship with God. Living with mercy means cultivating a heart that is soft, even in a hard world. It means resisting the pull of vengeance, the lure of self-righteousness, and the coldness of indifference. Mercy asks us to see the image of God in everyone, even those who hurt us. In a world often quick to condemn and slow to forgive, the merciful offer an alternative witness. They become vessels of divine compassion, healing wounds with presence, words, and actions that restore rather than tear down. These Beatitudes, the hunger for righteousness and the practice of mercy, speak to the moral fabric of a Christ-centered life. They reveal a posture of both longing and giving. To hunger for righteousness is to pursue what is right with relentless devotion. To show mercy is to hold that righteousness with open hands and a tender heart. Together they paint a picture of a person both courageous and compassionate, grounded in truth, but driven by love. This is the kind of disciple Jesus calls us to be, one whose inner world is aligned with the justice of God and whose outward life overflows with the mercy of Christ. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This statement cuts through all religious pretense and goes straight to the core of spiritual life. Purity of heart is not about external behavior or ceremonial cleanliness. It's about the integrity of one's inner life. A pure heart is undivided, sincere, and aligned with truth. It seeks no hidden agendas, harbors no duplicity, and stands transparent before God and others. In a world where image often overshadows authenticity, this beatitude calls us back to the simplicity of genuine faith. To be pure in heart means living with a unified soul. There is no fragmentation between who we are in public and who we are in private. There is no conflict between our intentions and our actions. This purity is not about perfection, it's about wholeness. It's a life free from the corrosion of hypocrisy, bitterness, or manipulation. The pure in heart are those who pursue God not for what they can get, but because of who God is. Their hearts are not crowded by idols or distracted by lesser loves. They are focused, grounded, and full of light. And the promise attached to this purity is nothing less than divine vision. They shall see God. This is the deepest longing of the human soul, to behold the face of the Creator, to experience the presence of the Holy. But this vision is not only a future hope, it begins now. The pure in heart begin to see God in the world around them, in the people they encounter, in moments of silence, in acts of love. Their vision is sharpened by sincerity, their perception cleared by trust. They recognize God not just in sacred spaces, but in everyday life, because their hearts are attuned to His presence. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Peacemaking is not the absence of conflict. It is the active creation of harmony. Peacemakers step into the chaos with courage. They mediate disputes, mend divisions, and seek unity where others settle for separation. Jesus doesn't say peacekeepers or peace lovers, He says peacemakers. It's a call to intentionality, to being architects of reconciliation in a fractured world. Peacemaking requires wisdom, patience, and courage. It's not passive, it's deeply active. It means being willing to listen when it's easier to argue, to understand when it's easier to judge, and to forgive when it's easier to resent. Peacemakers are bridge builders. They carry the burden of broken relationships, ethnic tensions, political divides, and spiritual wounds, and they do so with the compassion and strength that reflects their divine parentage. To be called children of God is to bear the family resemblance. God is a God of peace, not just tranquility, but shalom, completeness, justice, and flourishing. When we make peace, we join in God's work of restoration. We reflect His character and proclaim His kingdom. In a culture saturated with outrage, violence, and division, the peacemaker is a revolutionary figure. Their presence disrupts cycles of hate and replaces them with pathways of healing. These two beatitudes, purity of heart and the mission of peacemaking, are deeply connected. A pure heart sees clearly, and in seeing clearly, it discerns the ways peace can be made. A peacemaker must have a pure heart, free from hidden bias, from the need to dominate, from self-interest. Together, they form the essence of Christ-like maturity, inner integrity, and outward action. Jesus doesn't merely admire these traits, He blesses them, honors them, and declares that through them, heaven touches earth. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. These words are not a promise of ease, but a call to courageous fidelity. Jesus does not romanticize suffering. Rather, he honors those who endure hostility for the sake of living rightly. To be persecuted for righteousness means to experience rejection, mockery, or even violence, not because of wrongdoing, but because of a steadfast commitment to truth, justice, and compassion. It is a recognition that in a world often opposed to the values of the kingdom, standing for what is right will not always be welcomed. This beatitude echoes a reality that disciples throughout history have known too well, that following Christ is not a path paved with comfort. It is a narrow road that often invites resistance. Righteousness, whether lived through advocacy for the poor, defense of the marginalized, or personal integrity in corrupt systems, threatens the status quo. It exposes injustice, challenges power, and therefore provokes opposition. Yet Jesus assures us that those who suffer in this way are not abandoned. They are already citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Persecution for righteousness is not a misfortune, but a mark of faithfulness. It reveals a soul that refuses to compromise in the face of pressure, a heart that values divine approval over human applause. The promise that theirs is the kingdom of heaven is not only a future reward, it's a present reality. The persecuted are already participating in the reign of God, living under his rule, sustained by his presence and empowered by his Spirit. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Here Jesus becomes intensely personal. He shifts from general principles to direct address. Blessed are you. This is not abstract theology. It's intimate encouragement. He speaks to those who will feel the sting of betrayal, the weight of slander, and the loneliness of rejection, not because they have erred, but because they have aligned themselves with Christ. To suffer for Christ's sake is to share in his mission and ultimately in his glory. It places us in solidarity with prophets, apostles, and martyrs, those who bore witness to a greater truth despite the cost. Jesus invites his followers not to shrink back, but to rejoice and be glad, for great is their reward in heaven. This joy is not superficial. It's born from a deep knowing that our suffering is seen, honored, and eternally significant. In these final Beatitudes, Jesus strips away any illusions of a comfortable discipleship. He makes it clear that allegiance to the kingdom may come with a price. And yet, it is precisely in the midst of hardship that we find the richest blessings. The persecuted are not forsaken, they are favored. The reviled are not disgraced, they are dignified in God's sight. There is a profound dignity in enduring for what is right, in standing firm when others fall away, in loving when hatred abounds. Together, these declarations unveil a profound paradox, that in loss there is gain, in rejection, acceptance, in death, life. The way of the Beatitudes is not a detour from real life, it is the realist life. It is the road less traveled, but the one that leads to lasting joy, eternal purpose, and divine communion. It teaches us that to follow Jesus is not to escape the world's pain, but to transform it through holy resistance, unwavering love, and a faith that overcomes all things. Through persecution and misunderstanding, through trials and tears, the follower of Christ walks not alone, but with the assurance of divine presence. And in that sacred companionship, the kingdom of heaven is not only a destination, it is already breaking into the here and now, through lives consecrated to righteousness, come what may. The Beatitudes taken together do not form a list of isolated virtues, but a cohesive vision of life under God's reign, a vision that both invites and confronts. When Jesus spoke these words, he wasn't offering abstract spiritual ideals for a future age. He was sketching a portrait of the kind of people who embody the kingdom now. This portrait is radical because it calls into question every assumption society makes about power, value, success, and happiness. Those whom the world often pities or ignores, Jesus calls blessed. Those who live with humility, hunger for righteousness, extend mercy, and endure persecution are not spiritual underdogs. They are the very heart of God's movement. To live out the Beatitudes is to accept a new identity. It's not merely about adopting a few good habits or pursuing moral improvement. It's about allowing the Spirit of God to remake us from the inside out, to shape us into citizens of a new reality. The world values self-assertion, visibility, and personal achievement. The kingdom values surrender, purity, and the hidden strength of meekness. This reversal is not accidental, it is essential. Jesus doesn't soften his message to accommodate worldly expectations. Instead, he exposes them as empty and invites us into something richer, deeper, and truer. This vision is deeply countercultural. It asks us to reimagine what it means to live a successful life. In the world's eyes, success might look like wealth, comfort, and acclaim. But in the kingdom, success is measured by faithfulness, love, and inner transformation. The blessed are not the ones who climb highest, but those who kneel lowest. They are not celebrated for what they accumulate, but for what they give. In this redefinition, we are confronted with our attachments, our desire to be seen, to be right, to be in control. And yet, the Beatitudes gently pry open our hands, teaching us to let go and trust a greater good. One of the striking features of the Beatitudes is their sequence. Jesus begins with spiritual poverty and ends with persecution, creating a path that mirrors the journey of spiritual growth. First, we recognize our need. Then we mourn, surrender, hunger, extend mercy, seek purity, make peace, and endure. It is a movement from inward awareness to outward action, and finally to holy resistance. This progression suggests that discipleship is not static. It is a living process of becoming more like Christ. And in every step, we are accompanied by divine blessing, not necessarily ease, but favor, presence, and purpose. The Beatitudes also reveal that the kingdom of heaven is not a distant reality waiting on the other side of death. It is breaking in here and now, wherever hearts are surrendered to God's will. Every act of mercy, every moment of peacemaking, every hunger for justice becomes a seed of that kingdom. When we embody the Beatitudes, we become living witnesses to God's new world, even in the midst of the old one. We shine light in darkness, embody grace in a culture of cynicism, and stand firm in love when the winds of hatred blow. But to walk this path is not without cost. It demands courage to swim against the current, to hold on to truth when lies are easier, to offer forgiveness when vengeance is justified. And yet it is precisely through these difficult choices that the beauty of the Beatitudes is revealed. They are not burdens. They are the way to liberation. They free us from the tyranny of ego, the trap of materialism, the poison of resentment, and the illusion of control. In their place, we find joy, peace, clarity, and the deep assurance that we are seen and loved by God. In embracing the Beatitudes, we take on the mission of Jesus himself. We become salt and light, preserving what is good, illuminating what is true. We become part of a sacred revolution, not with swords or slogans, but with compassion, purity, and courage. This is the life the Beatitudes offer. Not easy, but holy. Not popular, but eternal. Not safe, but deeply, wondrously blessed. To live by the Beatitudes is to embrace a paradoxical strength, a hidden power that transforms the self from within and ripples outward into the world. The strength of the Beatitudes is not the kind wielded through dominance or force, but the kind that endures, that heals, that redeems. It is the power of the cross, the ultimate symbol of suffering love and triumphant humility. Those who walk this path are not shielded from life's trials, they are fortified through them. In surrendering to God's vision, they become resilient in ways the world cannot explain. This transformation begins with the interior life. The Beatitudes strip away the layers of false identity and ego that society often builds. They invite us to lay down the masks we wear to impress others and the defenses we erect to protect ourselves. What emerges is not a weaker self, but a truer one, anchored in God, rooted in grace, and open to being shaped anew. The poor in spirit, the mourners, the meek, they are not less than others. They are closer to the truth. Their strength comes from dependence on God, not from self-sufficiency. As the Beatitudes take root in our hearts, they begin to shape our relationships. Mercy becomes more than a virtue, it becomes a practice. Instead of judging others harshly, we begin to see with compassion. Instead of holding grudges, we choose reconciliation. In a culture driven by performance and perfectionism, the merciful are rare and radiant. They create space for others to grow, to fail, to heal. This kind of grace is revolutionary because it interrupts cycles of harm and offers something entirely different: hope. Purity of heart continues this transformation by refining our intentions. It challenges us to examine not just what we do, but why we do it. Are we driven by love or by fear? Are our actions aligned with truth or with convenience? A pure heart is a mirror. It reveals the deepest motivations behind our choices. And when that heart is aligned with God, clarity follows. We begin to discern what truly matters, and our lives become simpler, more focused, more peaceful. The call to be peacemakers then propels us outward into the world. Peacemaking is not passive. It's an active, deliberate effort to bring harmony where there is discord. It involves listening to others, seeking understanding, and working tirelessly for justice. It means stepping into conflicts not to win, but to heal. In every act of peacemaking, the children of God are revealed. They become signs of the kingdom in a world longing for healing. Their courage lies not in overpowering others, but in bridging divides, mending wounds, and sowing seeds of unity. As this way of life takes shape, it inevitably meets resistance. Righteousness challenges power, and love exposes fear. Those who live the Beatitudes may face criticism, exclusion, or persecution, not because they are doing something wrong, but because they are living in a way the world does not understand. Yet Jesus assures us, we are not alone. We stand in a long line of saints and prophets, martyrs and reformers who have walked this path before us. Their witness gives us courage. Their stories remind us that suffering for what is right is not failure, it is faithfulness. This journey reshapes our understanding of what it means to be blessed. No longer do we equate blessing with comfort or success. Instead, we begin to see blessing in every moment of grace, every act of mercy, every glimpse of God's presence. The Beatitudes teach us that blessing is not about external circumstances, but about the inner reality of being known, loved, and sustained by God. This blessing empowers us to persevere, to serve, and to love even when it costs us everything. Living the Beatitudes is not a single choice, but a daily surrender. It is a rhythm of returning to God, of choosing humility over pride, love over fear, and peace over control. It is the path of discipleship, narrow, challenging, and utterly beautiful. And as we walk it, we find not only the kingdom of heaven, but the heart of Jesus himself. As we continue deeper into the heart of the Beatitudes, the contrast between the way of Christ and the way of the world becomes increasingly clear. The Beatitudes are not meant to fit into the framework of conventional wisdom. They are meant to dismantle it. This is what makes them so unsettling, yet so profoundly liberating. They do not call us to minor adjustments, but to radical reorientation. They compel us to see through new eyes, to measure success by a heavenly standard, and to live in such a way that our very presence testifies to another kingdom. Each Beatitude presents not just a blessing, but a new lens. The poor in spirit are not pitied, they are honored. Those who mourn are not overlooked, they are comforted by God himself. The meek, far from being weak, are entrusted with the earth. In these teachings, Jesus elevates the hidden virtues and quiet strengths that the world ignores. He dignifies the unseen sacrifices and celebrates the unseen hearts. The Beatitudes validate the sacredness of struggle and the holiness of smallness. They remind us that God sees differently, loves differently, and calls us to do the same. This vision invites a new posture toward life. Instead of striving to be first, we learn the beauty of serving others. Instead of clinging to certainty, we embrace the humility of faith. Instead of reacting with anger, we respond with mercy. The Beatitudes gently dismantle the ego, replacing it with a heart open to grace. And as our inner world shifts, so does our outward behavior. We begin to live more intentionally, more compassionately, more aligned with the Spirit's movement. One of the quiet revolutions of the Beatitudes is how they redefine strength. In a world obsessed with power and influence, Jesus celebrates those who weep, who yield, who forgive. Strength, in the kingdom sense, is not about domination, it's about presence. The strong are those who remain faithful in suffering, who keep loving when it's hard, who choose peace in the midst of conflict. This strength does not roar, it whispers. It heals rather than harms, it restores rather than conquers, and it changes everything. This new way of seeing and being doesn't stay private. It overflows into community, into relationships, into how we engage the world. A person shaped by the Beatitudes cannot remain passive in the face of injustice. Their hunger for righteousness compels them to act. Their mercy shapes how they treat the vulnerable. Their purity guides their decisions, and their commitment to peace leads them into reconciliation. The Beatitudes are not a withdrawal from the world. They are a re-entry with transformed hearts. They also prepare us for the inevitable cost. As we live into these truths, we will find ourselves out of step with many around us. We may be misunderstood, opposed, even rejected. Yet Jesus does not leave us without hope. He reminds us that our suffering connects us with the prophets, with the saints, with himself. And in this fellowship of the faithful, we discover a joy that cannot be taken away. A joy that is rooted not in approval, but in truth. Not in comfort, but in communion. In this, we see the Beatitudes as both invitation and challenge. They are an invitation into deeper intimacy with God, and a challenge to embody that intimacy in how we live. They reveal what it looks like to be fully alive, to love deeply, serve humbly, and walk justly. They shape us not into religious performers, but into transformed people, witnesses to grace, ambassadors of peace, carriers of divine hope. The more we live the Beatitudes, the more we find they are not burdens but blessings. They do not narrow life, they expand it. They awaken us to beauty, to purpose, to the nearness of God in every moment. And through them, we become not just followers of Jesus, but reflections of him, mirrors of the kingdom, lit by his light, moving through the world with the power of love. The power of the Beatitudes lies in their ability to touch the deepest questions of human existence, questions about purpose, identity, suffering, and hope. They speak to the soul in ways that transcend time, culture, and circumstance. Across generations, across nations, these words of Jesus have reached into prisons and palaces, war zones and monasteries, corporate towers and quiet kitchens. They are as relevant today as they were on that hillside 2 millennia ago. In every era, they have whispered a holy alternative to the chaos of the world, a sacred rhythm that invites the heart to realign with eternity. Their relevance is especially profound in our present age. In a culture saturated with noise, speed, and distraction, the Beatitudes invite us to slow down and listen. They invite us to pay attention to the inner life, to cultivate stillness, and to live from the inside out. The world says, do more. The Beatitudes say, be more. The world pushes for performance. The Beatitudes nurture presence. In this way, they offer not only a moral compass, but a spiritual sanctuary, a place to return to when everything else feels unsteady. They also speak to our hunger for authenticity. So much of modern life is curated, filtered, and performative. We present polished versions of ourselves while hiding our fears, wounds, and doubts. The Beatitudes break through this facade. They tell us that God blesses not our image, but our truth. He meets us not in our perfection, but in our poverty of spirit, in our mourning, our meekness, our mercy, our hunger. The Beatitudes are a divine affirmation that the raw, real places in us are where the kingdom begins. For communities of faith, the Beatitudes are not optional readings, they are the constitution of the kingdom. They form the blueprint for a different kind of people. People who resist hatred with love, who face injustice with courage, who meet conflict with peace. A Beatitude-shaped community is marked by radical welcome, deep compassion, and relentless grace. It is a community that sees the invisible, honors the forgotten, and embraces the broken. It lives not by fear or scarcity, but by faith and abundance. This way of being is contagious. When people encounter a life shaped by the Beatitudes, they sense something different, something holy, healing, and deeply human. It's not just about doctrine or belief, it's about presence. The Beatitudes give flesh to the gospel. They incarnate love in everyday acts, forgiving a wrong, listening with empathy, standing up for the oppressed, offering kindness in a harsh world. In this way, they become a living sermon, a message preached not just in words, but in lives. And yet this path requires ongoing renewal. The world will constantly pull us towards cynicism, self-interest, and division. The Beatitudes call us back to center. They remind us who we are and whose we are. They call us to examine our hearts, to renew our commitments, and to keep walking even when it's hard. This is the discipline of the Beatitudes, a daily choosing of the narrow way, the way of Christ. In doing so, we find a deeper peace, not the peace of escape, but the peace of alignment. A peace that surpasses understanding because it is rooted in God Himself. We find that the Beatitudes are not just about blessing others. They bless us. They shape a life of meaning, integrity, and joy. They cultivate a soul strong enough to love without limits, to endure without bitterness, and to hope without fear. And in the end, this is the miracle, that such brief, poetic lines could contain such infinite wisdom. That in these words, spoken so long ago, we find the very heartbeat of God. They are not rules to be followed, but truths to be lived. And in living them, we are not diminished, we are made whole. We become the light of the world, the salt of the earth, the hands and feet of Christ in a world aching for redemption. The journey through the Beatitudes leads us to a surprising and sacred conclusion. This countercultural path is not simply about personal piety or spiritual reflection, it is about transformation on every level. The Beatitudes are revolutionary not because they promise instant change, but because they invite us into a lifelong process of becoming. They are the DNA of the kingdom of God, not designed for theory, but for living. They shape a new kind of humanity, one that mirrors the love, mercy, and justice of the one who spoke them into being. To live the Beatitudes is to live in defiance of the dominant narratives of fear, pride, and greed. It is to embrace a quiet strength rooted in humility, a courage born of compassion, a joy grounded not in circumstance but in sacred presence. The world tells us that blessing comes through accumulation, assertion, and achievement. Jesus tells us that blessing comes through surrender, gentleness, and righteous longing. These teachings do not call us to escape the world, but to engage it with a different spirit, a spirit of light in darkness, of peace in conflict, of mercy in brokenness. The Beatitudes remind us that the kingdom of heaven is not some far-off place we hope to reach, but a present reality we are invited to live into, right here, right now. Every time we choose grace over judgment, love over fear, service over status, we participate in this kingdom. We build bridges where there were walls. We sow healing where there was hurt. We reflect the image of Christ, not in grand gestures, but in quiet faithfulness, daily acts of courage, and persistent hope. As we reflect on this sacred manifesto, we are left not with a checklist, but with an invitation to be shaped not by the noise of the age, but by the still, steady voice of Jesus. An invitation to resist conformity and embrace holiness. An invitation to let go of false blessings and open our hearts to the true ones that cannot be stolen, shaken, or diminished. The Beatitudes are not easy, but they are beautiful. They demand everything, yet offer more than we can imagine. They do not promise success by the world's standards. They promise something infinitely greater, communion with God, the joy of truth, and a life that leaves ripples of grace long after we're gone. They invite us to a depth of soul that cannot be reached by any shortcut, a life that bears witness to eternity. So let this journey not end here, but begin again each day. Let the words of Jesus settle into your bones. Let them guide your decisions, shape your relationships, and define your values. May you mourn and be comforted. May you hunger and be filled. May you show mercy and receive it in abundance. May you be pure, be peace, be light. And when the world resists, when the cost feels great, remember this: you are not alone. You walk in the footsteps of saints, prophets, and the Savior himself. And in every step you are blessed. Not because life is perfect, but because grace is present. Not because all is easy, but because all is sacred. If this message has stirred something in your soul, we invite you to join the journey. Subscribe to Holy Path Insights and walk with us as we explore the sacred mysteries of life, faith, and transformation. Together, let us become people of the Beatitudes, living signs of the kingdom, bearers of divine hope, and lovers of a world God still so deeply loves.